I say record. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. This afternoon, we are going to discuss union versus non-union, more specifically actors' equity, as that is the actors and stage management union, and we are all stage managers, so that is our union. I personally am a non-union professional stage manager. I was offered my full equity contract when I was 23. Very young to be offered a full equity contract, in my opinion. At the time, I didn't want to take it. I wasn't going to get enough weeks for healthcare, and there were some other reasons why I chose to not join at the time, which in the long run has been better for me personally, as most of the projects I work on, they prefer I'm not union. I ran a talk show at the Public Theater for 2.5 years as the production stage manager and producing, where I could not be attached to a union for that, which that is one of the most important projects I have worked on to date. As well as I've mentioned this before, I work on many one-person shows where they also prefer I'm not a union. So it just works in my favor. Of course, I don't get health insurance through the union and other benefits, but I do have my own health insurance and make that work on my own. And, you know, I am pro-union. I just want to put that there. I'm, of course, pro-union, all unions. It's just personally not something I wanted at the time, and I don't believe moving forward in my professional career I will do. I am EMC, the Equity Membership Program, Points Program, which you work, I think now it's 25 weeks for regional work, and you can join the union fully. And that was something I joined a couple years ago on the project. It felt right at the time, which is nice because I can work on other projects that aren't union and not, because when you are union, you are supposed to only be working on union productions depending on the contract. And just to be clear, you are still a professional, you're still an artist, whether you're union or not. Some people feel the opposite, but I fully feel, and I know my partners here feel, you are a non-union, you are still an artist, you are still a professional. And now I'm going to turn it to Lisa to talk about her experience from going from non-union to union.
Actually, I think I was next to talk about the EMC program and all that.
Oh, okay. I had
No,
that
that's cool.
wrong on my notes.
A bunch of us have,
England.
we all have our own transitions into equity. So I am an equity stage manager. I got my signed my first contract in September 2015 and was officially approved by the council in November 2015. So however you want to say how long I've been a member. Great. I also was part of the EMC program, which stands for Equity Membership Candidacy or Candidate. I started that on the old system because there has been a revamp where if you weren't part of another union, you accumulated 50 points, and then after that, you could not work at an equity house without the benefit of an equity contract. I got to about 30 weeks, but then was offered my card outright. I was 24 when I got my card. The reason why I chose to do so is because I thought that I had the connections to continue working as an equity stage manager, because as Lizzie alluded to, once you become an equity member, you can no longer work any contract under equity jurisdiction. So that's normally like theater, straight play, some or I forget the word, some like Sleep No More, musicals, things like that, without the benefit of a union contract. Additionally, if you work in another union's jurisdiction, you should not accept a non-union contract at a place where they're trying to organize. So with me, I was offered my card with a theater that was offering me an entire season out first, both as the resident production stage manager and the production manager. So there was a balance on that. And there was also kind of a hope that I would be there at least 3 years. So at least I had extended. I didn't stay that long because of certain things that were happening at the theater. But I also knew beforehand that I had a connection with a friend up here in New York City to work with my next company after that, with the possibility of working with TheaterWorks USA, which actually did turn out to work out. Was able to get an interview and get hired for multiple contracts. So that worked out for me. Another reason of beyond like the protections of like health insurance, there's a 401k plan, there is pension as well. The 401k plan is optional if you choose to have many contracts to contribute to it. Some require contributions like the production contract. But the other reason, as I've heard from many people, to be in a union is to be political or a political act. So it is towards that idea of strengthening workers, strengthening bargain power. Because another benefit of the union, you have someone bargaining for at least minimums for you. Also someone there to watch your back and advocate for you if these conditions aren't being met. Yes, there are problems with it, and it's not completely perfect because it depends on the strength of the union and the communication between the members and the union. But at least there is some method there. You can bargain beyond the minimums the union sets, but at least there's that base. One other thing about the EMC program right now, as Lizzie mentioned, there has been a revision to it. Instead of having to gain 50 points, which you gain them by working as either a non-union actor or a non-union stage manager, assisting a union stage manager at specific union houses. They have to be ones with full contracts that have been established at least 3 years, I believe, generally. For some areas, it's pretty hard to gain 50 weeks, specifically in New York City, where either most theaters have to be completely union, like you can't be a non-union member for the most part. But out in the regions, it is possible to find those theaters because less theaters have that required closed shop system. Closed shop meaning where you have to be everyone working there under that particular jurisdiction has to be on a union contract. So the new system is you can earn up to 25 weeks. After earning that 25 weeks, if you think you have the experience and are ready to join the union, you can. However, if you feel like you aren't, like I certainly didn't feel like I was completely ready even after my 30 weeks, you can choose to pay another fee and continue up to 50 weeks to extend there. The fee that's required to be part of the program eventually can be deducted from the dues that you have to pay for initiation to become a full member. So there is that little bit of incentive to join. Not only that, typically for a lot of EMC actors, when it comes to EPAs or equity principal auditions, you will be seen after the equity actors, but before those who are non-union, non-EMC. So there is that slight benefit there. I think that's all I have right now, but now I pass it on to Lisa.
Okay, and I'm gonna pick up a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about my journey. I'm the old lady in the group, so I got my equity card 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. I was offered an equity contract. I was not in the EMC program. As we've talked about before, my background, I was working as a teacher for a little over 20 years in North Carolina, and then I moved here 4 years ago. to come back to stage management. So when I moved here, I was told by several people, you do not need to worry about EMC program. You have plenty of experience. Somebody will offer you an equity contract and you can get your card that way. And that's what I did. It just so happened that the very first show I did in New York, the artistic director for that company also worked as an artistic director in a regional theater in the summer. And he offered me an equity contract through that regional theater. So I got my equity card at 50. So I certainly waited long enough to get mine. And I know that you'll hear from a lot of people the answer, when should I get my equity card? And that answer is usually when it's right for you. And I think that depends not only on when it's right for you in terms of your maturity level, your education level, your experience level, but I think it also depends on where you live. It would have made no sense for me to get my equity card where I was living in North Carolina. There are very few theaters that offer equity contracts. I was living just outside of Charlotte at the time, and Charlotte, for some reason, has not been able to maintain an equity house. We have one off and on. Currently, they do not have one now. So it would not have been beneficial to my career to have had an equity card when I was living in North Carolina. I'm now based here in New York City. That makes perfect sense for me to have an equity card. I was working, even when I was non-equity, on showcase codes, which are the hybrid where there are equity and non-equity people involved in that production. So I was working under some equity, certainly under equity rules, some equity rules, and doing a lot of things that an equity stage manager would do. I just didn't have the card at that point. In talking about auditions, whether you're an actor or, interestingly enough, there are some companies that will ask you to come by and audition, so to speak, or interview during EPAs or ECCs, chorus calls. Being part of the EMC program does help you, as Ingrid pointed out, in terms of an EPA. So you're going to be seen before non-equity, but after all the equity actors. It does not help you in a chorus call. EMCs are lumped in with the non-equity. But I've had as an audition monitor a few strange situations where there are theaters, both based here in New York City and outside of the city, who have put in their casting notice, we are looking for a production stage manager, an assistant stage manager. You are welcome to schedule an appointment during our EPA and come and interview. I've done that one time just out of curiosity. An EPA is a very short amount of time to talk, and I had never done that type of interview, so I was curious. It was for a New York-based company, so I thought that was a little strange too, that easily could interview. They were here in the city, but I did go for an interview during an EPA, and it went very well, and that was great. I ended up not getting the job, which was fine, but I also felt like that process was not beneficial, at least to me, as a stage manager, because of the short time that you're offered. If it was a company that was not New York City based, then it makes more sense to me if you want to do it that way, but that sometimes is an option at an audition for an EPA. I'll talk a little bit about the other union that you'll see here in New York. I see it frequently as an audition monitor, and that is AGMA, which is the American Guild of Musical Artists. A lot of our musical theater actors and actresses, people that stage manage a lot of musical theater, opera, dance, etc., are members of AGMA. I had never heard of AGMA till I came to New York, but for a lot of young people who want the opportunity to, in some ways, hasten or speed up that track into equity or into a union, AGMA is an option. With AGMA, you do not have to have any points like you do with the EMC program with equity. All you have to do is fill out an application, pay their $1,000 initiation fee, and you are a member of AGMA. For the first year, that doesn't help you much, other than they do also have health and pension and some other types of benefits similar to equity. Once you have been a member of AGMA for a year, you are now eligible as an actor to go into a principal audition, an EPA, or a chorus call, an ECC, and show your card and get an appointment just like an equity member. So you skip that non-equity process. Once you're a member of AGMA, if you choose to also join equity, all you have to do is pay the remainder of the initiation fee, the difference between the $1,000 and whatever equity's initiation fee is at that time. Currently, it's $1,700 for equity. So if you are an AGMA member, you would pay the $700 to equity, the two equaling what equity's initiation fee is. And then you would also become a member of equity. But I know a lot of young actors who figure that that's the easier way to get that equity status, particularly in the audition room, to join AGMA, because the initiation fee is lower. Their yearly dues are lower. It's $100 for the year. Equity currently is $87 every 6 months, so twice a year. So AGMA is an option, particularly if you have a background or your interest level is more musical theater oriented, opera dance. That is another option for a union for you. For me, equity was just the right step at this point in my career. I'm not teaching full-time anymore. So I knew this was what stage management was what I wanted to do full-time. So an equity card just went along with it. I do have outside health insurance. So I don't need the health insurance through equity. It would be nice. I was on track to do that this year until everything shut down. It's nice to have the extra. I now have a second pension with equity as well as my pension from teaching. So that's a nice little benefit. But other than that, a lot of the benefits that were there were not beneficial to me at my age. But I do encourage you that if this is something you want to continue to do for your career and for life, thinking in your 20s and in your early 30s about joining a union, whatever that union may be, where you have the option for health insurance, pension fund, the option for a 401k to invest in the future is a good, solid answer. So I do think that that is something that you should take into consideration, even if you don't live in one of the major cities. If you're planning to move, certainly that would also be an option. So that's kind of my journey. I'm going to turn it over to Taylor, who's going to talk a little bit about her journey.
So I have my card the longest of us here. I got mine back in 2003. And honestly, I think I took mine too soon. And that's because, as Ingrid was saying before, and Lisa, you need, it's nice. Yes, it's a nice shiny card and everything like that. And you can get the healthcare benefits from that, and you can get the contracts from that, and you can get the minimums that those contracts give you. That being said, though, in order to get especially the health weeks and the pension and everything, you need to have the work booked, and you have to do those weeks in order to acquire everything that I just mentioned. And I didn't have that. I had the show that I got my contract on, which was called The Crack-Free Handyman. It was a musical. And I think you can look it up on YouTube. They paid toward my initiation fee, which was nice, which at the time was $1,100. Now it's more. So our fees were, our dues were also less at the time as well. They've they go up incrementally every so often. But there is, I will say, there's quite a bit of stretch of time in between when those go up, which is nice. And again, I wouldn't complain about our dues comparatively to any other union that there is, because they are low. But again, my background is that I got the card on one show in particular, and then I did a lot of showcases, which you don't necessarily need your card for. And then I worked in television news for 10 years, which I certainly didn't need a card for. And then I wound up, I decided to leave news, and I came back to theater. So I'm using it more now than I did then. And I will say that I played the PA game for a very short time. Out of college, I was an intern at Westport Country Playhouse, and what they're, at least over the summer, what they do is their interns are the assistants to whichever department they're assigned to, or that they applied for, rather. I applied for the stage management department, so I was the assistant stage manager. We had assistant directors, we had assistant prop handlers, designers, and assistants in the shop, building sets and such. And they also had assistants, interns in their office. I don't honestly remember what their titles were specifically. I know one of them was a company management assistant, but there were a couple of others as well, who worked really more on the business end of things and really didn't deal with the cast or crew at all. And that was a great experience, I think. That was an experience where we worked really hard, but we also got to hang out and play hard too. And we were just out of college, most of us, so that was fun. But again, I think I would have waited a bit longer, knowing what the experience that I have now. I didn't have it then. And again, as Ingrid and Lizzie and Lisa.
That is my name.
Ooh, I just full named you.
I like my full name.
No, it's okay. Lizzie and Lisa have mentioned it helps to have the experience. And I just didn't. I don't like to boast, and I'm not trying to be boastful, but I am good at what I do now. Then I had to learn. And I think a lot of what we do, yes, you can go to school for stage management. I did not. And I do think that a lot of it is learning on the job, because it's your practical experience. I've said before, I think college is it's a bit of a microcosm, and you have other people to fall back on, which is nice. But when you're in the real rehearsal room, you're on the actual deck by yourself. You're falling back more on your own wits, more so than you did in college, I think. Also, as Lizzie said before, and not that, Lizzie, you need to boast yourself either or anything, or my confirmation of what you said before, but non-union is just as, if not sometimes more professional than a union person is on any show. I've worked with both. And I've, for a short time I was non-union as well. And I was just as professional then as I am now. It's just, now I have more experience as a PA. And we're going to talk about this, all of us, in a little bit as well. But as a PA, you're still doing a lot. Even, 10, 12 years ago when I was PAing, you're still given quite a bit to do in the room, especially if you're there from day one of rehearsal. For me, I was most often on book. I was the script person, supervisor, I guess you could call it unofficially, because I took care of the script changes, I took care of the line changes, the line notes. Every once in a while, depending on if the stage manager or assistant stage manager needed to leave the room for some reason, I would take over prop tracking notes. It wasn't blocking at that point for me. But sometimes, I would help track props and things like that. Again, and that depended on the size of the show. But, if you've got a book that's 100 to, between 180, 200 pages long, that's a lot of lines to be on book for. That's a lot. And you've got a bigger cast, that's a lot of people to be on book for. And that's I think that in particular is a specific skill set to be able to just do that right off the top. Which is something you learn going in. And again, we're gonna talk about PAs and what their job is, and sometimes what their job is not, and whether or not we feel that they should be on contract as well. I do think that for a PA, I would like a PA contract on a certain show, because again, I've done regional, and that's the highest I've done. So if I were to go into a Broadway contract right now, I don't expect a stage manager position. I don't. I expect I would be a PA of some sort. And I'm okay with that, because I would mind, even if there's some incentive with health insurance there, that would be great. I wouldn't expect to obviously get paid what the ASMs and PSMs are getting paid, because that's a different situation. It is a different level. And they have more experience on those types of shows than I do. So I think that, it's the pay what you're worth kind of thing. And if you're still new to the game, you still have to take the lower cut. But I do think it helps as a PA. It would help, because I know there were situations that I was in where, I got hurt and there was nothing I could really do about it. I gave the note. There were certain set pieces that, and I'm not blaming anyone, but things happen. Things get shifted around where weight gets redistributed, and certain pieces weren't moving the way that they should. And they weren't really given the attention that they needed. Because this was a summer stock type of situation where you're only using it for like a week and a half, 2 weeks tops. But a week and a half, 2 weeks on the same part of your body hurts. And that, I think, it would have been good if I had been backed up by some sort of contract or union then. And I wasn't. I booked my first contract right after that, so that was good. But yeah, I think the rest of us, if you guys want to jump in on your ideas of anything, regarding the PA or
I personally, if there had been a union contract for production assistants when I was starting out right out of college, and I didn't PA too much, only a couple shows, and then I started ASMing and PSMing after I graduated, I probably would have joined. I say probably because, I don't know what I would have, but I think I would have felt security in joining the union if it had been a specialized production assistant contract for Actors Equity.
Okay. Want me to go into this one from the union perspective?
Go for it.
So first thing, one thing that's often not said and is becoming more said now is you can never be forced to join a union because of legislation in this country, probably from the beginning of the 20th century. You can never be forced to join. There's been things floating around like you can sign a contract, refuse your card, and defer it for a couple of times, but then there's a limit. Never. Not only that, but even without being a union member, you can enjoy union benefits. So like health insurance, 401k, pension. The only thing you really can't do without being a union member is be a deputy, because you do need to be someone who is part of the union and ultimately has an online account, because the deputy portal is all online right now. So there's that.
I don't think Ingrid, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you can vote either in equity elections.
You can't vote. You can't really be part of the governance, but you can get the benefit and all that of everything else. Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad I have the health insurance. I've been insured ever since I first got my weeks the first time. So continuously, actually going to be 5 years, hopefully, or at least 5 years, and we'll see after that, because I had my weeks before the pandemic started. With PAs, so PA is often understood to be a position it can be in any department, but often associated with, and way we talk about, with the stage management team, serving as some sort of assistant to the stage managers. A lot of times regionally, this will be the only person a production stage manager has, specifically on smaller equity contracts. For example, there's something called the SPT contract, the Small Professional Theater contract, which requires an equity stage manager, but has certain triggers to get an equity ASM. If those triggers aren't met and the theater decides not to hire an equity ASM, they are required to provide a production assistant from the first day of rehearsal to assist the stage manager. So you have that aspect. And sometimes that's non-union. For the most part, in many regions of the country, it's understood by union members that a production assistant cannot be a union member, because that's oftentimes in those cases, you're doing stage management work without the benefit of a stage management contract. Yes, it might have been different before, run getting coffee, things like that. But once you're crossing the line of actually doing stage management paperwork, sometimes people even say prompting, especially calling cues on the deck, that's when you transfer over. Where it becomes a little bit more of like we have two different voices going on is when you hit the larger regional theaters and specifically off-Broadway and Broadway. There, because of the evolution of how difficult and large these shows are getting, you need production assistants are often, or stage management production assistants are often doing more of the stage management work. So like tracking, calling cues, running side of the deck. For many producers and even production stage managers, they want an equity member doing that because they have someone who has experienced however much that is, not only to do those tasks, but also eventually to, as we mentioned last week, become a sub-stage manager or a replacement stage manager. So you already have that. That's not saying that someone who hasn't taken their card yet will not be considered for those positions or hasn't been. There have been examples of non-union stage managers getting PA positions and eventually getting their cards, maybe through becoming a sub or through that aspect. So you're running into a little bit of that of, it's not where do we fall on the line of you should not be doing stage management work without the benefit of a union card. Currently, one of that is a big debate among union stage managers and in the union. There's trying to figure out a way to get that onto union contract, whether that is creating like a union stage management PA, or there have been advances in getting rehearsal stage manager contracts for things like Broadway. So you're not needed for the entire length of the run, but there to mount the show in rehearsal. Oftentimes with Broadway shows, the number of stage managers required to be on contract for the show is set. That rehearsal stage manager just adds one to the beginning, doesn't include in the number of stage managers set for the run of the show. Of course, things like Spider-Man, when they determined they need more stage managers on that show, I think they had up to, like we said last week, 7. That can be increased. But that's a way, 2 of the solutions right now or options being thrown around. The one thing I've heard as a con of creating like a union PA position is that now you're creating a lower level of pay and all that for stage managers instead of, which weakens negotiating for the higher levels. So instead of like trying to get another assistant, now you're arguing for more PAs, all about negotiation tactics, because adding any of this is going to be a give and take with the producers and the Broadway League. So that's kind of part of the complicated nature of this debate.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to realizing how many people you need on your team for a show. And when you say size of a show, it doesn't necessarily mean how many people are in your cast. That's part of it. But it also includes what exactly is going on with that show, what is involved with it, as far as, you know, if you've got huge moving set pieces and fly rail and deck and everything like that, you want the eyes for those things. And no, you're not just paying people to stand around and look at stuff. You're paying them to do very specific, make sure that things are happening the way they're supposed to be happening every single time. And that includes the people, that includes the mechanics, and anything else you can think of surrounding that, really. Because it's a safety thing. And the more you experience that, the more you become good at that kind of thing. I've said before, I try to watch as much of a show as I possibly can when I'm backstage. And it's not because I'm sitting there and I have nothing to do. It's because that's what I have to do. That's, you know, everything that's going on stage is part of my responsibility when I'm a deck stage manager. Everything backstage is part of my responsibility as well. So it's keeping your attention split, and being good at that. And the more eyes that you have there on your team, it helps. And it takes the pressure off of you a little bit too.
But as Ingrid pointed out, a lot of times that pressure that we feel and we know we need another person is butting up against the financial issues from the producer. And that's the difficult thing. We know how we do our job. We know if we need more eyes or if we need more hands. That's not always recognized in the producer's office, because those producers are looking at how much we have to spend to hire another person. And if that, as Ingrid pointed out, goes to a union contract and becomes a rehearsal stage manager or even a union contract for a PA, that's money that's difficult sometimes to find, or difficult to simply get the producer to acknowledge is there and use.
I do think, and there have been certain situations where a team or the PSM will sit down with the producer and say, you know, you've got your list of reasons. You got to be very strategic and smart about it, and even maybe, you know, cost effective also. Not maybe, definitely cost effective, because that's money is very much dollar signs is what they're thinking of. And, you know, yes, to us in a certain degree as well, because we want to get paid what we want to get paid, obviously, but that's a different story. If you sit down with a producer or producers and say, this is X, Y, and Z of why I feel we need this number of people. It's called negotiation, is what it is. This many people. And obviously you start with your dream number. It's the number that you know you're probably not going to hit. But, and you want your, you know, set what your minimum is. You know, this is the reason why I need this many people doing this thing or these things, either backstage with me, you know, helping us in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes it can help, maybe also hinder, having someone come backstage and actually watch what it is that you do, because they don't understand. They don't necessarily understand. Some of them do, some of them don't. I will say most of them don't. And you'll hear me say, I've said multiple times, there's a reason why I do what I do and when they do what they do. I can't do their job either. I'm not supposed to. But I think it would help. I've seen it help where at least if someone's backstage, they can at least understand, like, hey, this is the reason why we stand in this exact spot when this scene change is happening, because if we don't, we're going to get something hit in the face or you're going to get your toes run over.
Yeah.
Because we know that backstage is small.
It does help. I actually had a designer who was also a director.
Yeah.
And he was a brilliant set designer.
Yeah.
He would bring in these gorgeous renderings, and he would go, oh, this set piece is going to go here backstage and it's going to go here. And I would let him get through the whole spiel and then say, where do the actors go?
Yeah.
Where am I supposed to go? And until I actually took him backstage on a production and showed him how difficult it was to have people and scenery moving in and out, and how little room there was, he didn't get it. You're exactly right. And there was that light bulb that went off of, oh, you're right. I'm thinking, yeah, there's room for the set. I'm forgetting about everything else that goes into this job and everything else that has to work together.
There was one time I think we were in tech at this point. I was standing on stage and the director asked if a certain set from like, you know, stage right wing 1. And I look over and I was like, no, no, I can't. And he was like, you didn't even have to think about that, did you? No, because I did my job ahead of time.
Because you thought about it ahead of time. I had this same designer and director say, well, we can just open the back door at intermission and store things, set pieces on the loading dock. And I said, yes. What a time.
I've had that as well. for this particular show, actually, we can store it in the loading dock, and they had some sort of makeshift overhang that they would hang up sometimes, because there was stuff stored out there eventually, and for some shows, but they were metal pieces, but they were actually fairly light, at least on the shows that I did there. Other shows not so much, but no, there was this particular show that I'm talking about where the director was like, "Oh, can this come from stage right?" And I said no. Some of the pieces that they wanted to store outside were not light, and I first and foremost, we had a PA in rehearsal with us, and I knew she was gonna have to deal with a lot of that stuff more than I was, actually, so that I could be more free range. And I turned to her and I was like, "We're not doing that. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to have you sacrifice your," because it involved, that's the other thing. People don't always understand that the people who are, yes, maybe as the TD or as someone who's installing the set, you can flip up that set piece or that platform, but you're not the one doing it for the run of the show.
Yeah.
That's your deck, your PAs, your whoever they like to call them at the theater. That's the other thing. Sometimes the theaters like to give us names that are not necessarily what our actual title is. There's that.
Yeah.
But I turned to them and I said, "That's not happening. I'm not having you sacrifice," because I knew this person in particular does have some back issues, and I don't want to cause issues for other people down the line. You have to think of sustainability, because yeah, you're doing this show for a little bit of time, but you've got your body for your entire life. So it's nice to have suggestions. You don't have to take them though.
And that is the beauty of being part of the union, is that equity puts those things in place for you to be able to say that as a stage manager, that is your full-time job. So if there are other responsibilities that a producer wants you to take on, such as moving scenery, running a light board or a soundboard, that those things you have to be compensated for those. When you're non-union, they don't have to do that. You can try to work that out, and in some cases you're going to get lucky and have a great producer that is going to say, "Yes, I recognize that is an extra duty and I will compensate you for that." But becoming part of the union means that they don't have a choice. And so you have some bargaining or negotiating power there to say, "Okay, you've expressed you would like for me to run the light board. Yes, I can do that, and the show will be fine. It's not a problem, but I want extra compensation."
Yeah.
Which is usually nowhere near what they're going to pay somebody to come in and run the light board.
I mean, something.
So they're saving money to do that.
I mean, something I'm going to say is production assistant is a very gray term when it comes to theater. I can't speak to film or television because I haven't spent that much time in that part of the industry, but for the, plays and musicals and opera, production assistant, like expanding off what Taylor said and what Lisa said, you're given these immense responsibilities, that you're not just an assistant. Sometimes you're doing a full job. And I don't personally love the term production assistant in theater. I think associate is more appropriate, and maybe there's a term out there we haven't come up with yet that can replace production assistant, maybe hopefully before we go back to working in person and normalize and not do Zoom theater. But there's being on book, working on the deck, doing line notes is a lot. I mean, I when I have been a production assistant, it's not just physically draining, you're emotionally drained because of a lot of what they're asking of you, and you're not being paid necessarily what you're worth, and you're commuting in this set in the other, and yeah, you're gonna potentially be the one asked to go get the coffee, and that's not always a good deal, but it can be a lot. I mean, walking through Midtown on a hot summer day with a bunch of food and this and that, and then going back to doing your other responsibilities, it's a lot. And I say this, especially because, people watching this, you probably have been a production assistant or an intern on a show. Feel confident about writing out your contract. If you're not comfortable with what they've sent you, not just financially, just what your actual responsibilities are to an extent, write it out and send it back to them. And if you can't figure it out, maybe it's not the right project to be working on. And yeah, you don't when you're starting out, it's hard to say no to certain things, but it will build your confidence, because don't be taken for granted. Just, it's a muscle you have to work, like at anything else. But you're traditionally as we know, production assistants aren't just sitting there observing. You're doing real work.
Yeah. And that's also another topic that we have is knowing when to say no to a job or things that they're asking you to do. I also wanted to say that sometimes your production assistant who is with you in rehearsal doesn't always carry over into your show. And for the people coming into the situation, sometimes they will keep the production assistant to help you get through rehearsal, or a tech rehearsal rather. So just before opening. For the people coming into it though, you're coming into something that is already a moving piece. And that's not easy, because I've done that as well. I've been the PSM that was not part of rehearsal at all. They had a rehearsal stage manager. I just took over for the show. Yeah, you shadow for a couple of shows. I think this was a showcase, so it was I probably had one instance to shadow the person who had been the rehearsal stage manager, and then she shadowed me, and then I was on my own. And it was a heavy show. It was a very cue heavy show, both lights and sound. One of those shows where you're not quiet at all backstage, because you're just calling cues all the time. So that was a lot. And I don't tend to get nervous for a show really when I'm calling it, or backstage so much. You get the opening night jitters every once in a while, but this one in particular got me. I knew there was and there were not a lot of moving pieces. I knew people were not going to get hurt necessarily, but you still don't want to mess up your show, because you want to get hired back. But yeah, it's hard to be the person that's coming into things as relief in any way, I think, especially when the rest of the cast and crew is used to hearing things a certain way or seeing things done a certain way. You're asking people who have done this for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or years even to sort of adjust themselves to this new person. Yes, this new person does need to do more adjusting to them, but still it's a different, nobody's the same. No two people are the same.
I did a show several years ago in New York, and as a production assistant, I was the only PA for a play, but it had a lot of deck responsibilities. And there was a podium that had to be moved off stage, and I took it off, and it was awkward to move. And like, it was on like these 3 wheels, and one kind of needed a lot of WD-40, which I kept saying, and they were like, nah, it doesn't. And I'm like, no, it does. And that was annoying. But the PSM was like, it's not hard, and he did it. And I'm like, okay, but I'm showing you I can't. It's not like I was nervous or anything like that. I don't mind if I have to do scene changes on stage. I used to not love doing it, but by this time I felt confident, and people are going to see you, and it's a part of the show and the magic. And I just kept saying to them, the wheels are off. I don't know how you're doing it versus me, but I need to practice. And it was a whole thing. And eventually we figured out a way for me to do it that the wheels were not knocking around. But I felt confident using my voice, and whatever magic he was able to do pushing it, and no one else was. He was the only person that could get this off without it looking like a train wreck, but he was the calling SM. So it was not a show you rotated. I did the deck, and someone else did stage right, and he did the calling. And like Taylor said, make time to practice, but speak up. So it might have been easy for this person to move the podium, but for me it was one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do for some reason. I don't know. It was also the floor was not level, and they just kept thinking I was making excuses. I'm like, I'm not. You literally see me doing it. So but you learn from it. I mean, that was several years ago, and I can kind of laugh about it now. But at the time, it was so like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to. When is this contract ending? Sort of situation.
Yeah, And the other thing about, the people on your team, the eyes on deck, when you've got your crew coming to you saying, hey, this fly is not, because it was a manual fly system, not, and I use the word system lightly. It was manual, and they were heavy pieces. One was heavier than the other. It was a Garland piece, which sounds light, but when you add the electrics to it, it's not. The ropes that they were using, it's rope. Ropes have give. They're built to have give eventually. And when they're weighted on the other side, they're going to stretch. And the carriers are going to get off track somehow. And again, the TD tested it. He was able to do it. And there were 2 or 3 of us that said, okay, but we're the ones that are doing this nightly. And it's not operating the way that it was when we first opened, which it was good when we opened. And that was a piece that needed looking at every few shows. It needed to get reset somehow. And it wasn't until myself, the person who had been our PA was also on crew with us, and another crew member were watching from the ground while the TD was up in the bucket. And actually one of us pulled the rope. I don't know who it was pulling the rope. And then the other were eyes on the ground. He was eyes up in the bucket, and he was watching the suspension twist as it was coming off stage. And it's not supposed to do that. So we're like, I have no problem saying I told you so when I have to say it. Because if that's what's going to get the job done, it needs to get done. And again, there have been times where in the union, you have what's called a representative. And there have been times I've had to go to the representative for things that I can no longer deal with myself. And if I'm the ASM, the stage manager can no longer deal with it themselves, or the deputy can't. Sometimes you just have to go straight to the top. Nobody wants to, but sometimes you have to. And it's
these are also
option.
sorry.
Mm-hmm.
These are also questions that I feel like aren't always asked in interviews with production assistants and interns. Like, I know that because primarily you will be on the deck depending on the show, not calling it. That's usually the PSM or the first. And, because it's such a gray term, PA, I have asked people, depending on the show, their skills for those physical jobs, but it's not asked enough, which is also a whole other issue, because you can't just throw someone on these huge flats and be like, oh, they're gonna be fine.
Right.
They've never done that a day in their life, and that is intimidating.
Yeah. I believe in seeing some of the discussion on social media that is part of the conversation about production assistants possibly going under a union contract, is then having to define, well, what is a production assistant? What are their responsibilities and their time commitment and those kinds of things, because it is a very nebulous job right now. And it depends on the production that you're on and who your team is as to what those responsibilities are. So if you are working as a PA, there's no guarantee that the next show that you do, you're going to have the same responsibilities that you had before. So I think that's one of the discussions I've seen that's part of the issue, is that that's not clearly defined.
I've never had as a PA, I mean, I've had similar like line notes and being on book and stuff, but never had the same exact responsibility being
Right.
a PA on one project versus another.
That can almost be said for a lot of our job too, though, because it also depends on what the show itself requires. That being said, since we're talking about lineage of PA, ASM, PSM, there is a chain of command that you have to follow. Like a PA can't necessarily go directly to the director or the producer. You got to go up the ladder. An ASM can't supersede the PSM. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. I'll put it that way. Unless there's major issue with that person that's ahead of them, because you don't want to step on people's toes. You do want to create as best of a working condition as you can, a working relationship. That being said, sometimes you gotta, again, go right to the rep. A PA right now can't do that. and technically there's not equity can't do anything about it, but you can at least bring it up sort of in conversation with your rep, so that they know that that's what's going on in the theater. Because odds are, if it's happening to a PA, it's not just happening to them, from what I've experienced anyway. Yes, Ingrid, I think you wanted to say something, I thought.
I have thoughts and I'm not sure best how to express them or if it's a good time in this version. So I'm going to save them maybe for a later topic.
Sounds good.
And I think actually on that, we're pretty good. We're at our time.
Yep. So next week, more paperwork.
More paperwork.
All paperwork.
Love paperwork.
Ends.
Okay.
Bye.
Cool.
Thank you.